I am 95 years old, and the most foolish thing I ever did was not a bad investment, not a broken promise, not a word said in anger I couldn't take back. The most foolish thing I ever did was lie still in the dark every night for 4 months, feeling my chest tighten like a fist was closing around my heart, and then get up the next morning and make coffee. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was age. I told myself a lot of things that were easier to believe than the truth. There is a particular kind of stupidity that looks exactly like strength. I know it well. I practiced it for decades. And I am going to tell you what it cost me, not in vague terms, not in lessons you've already heard, but in the exact texture of a Tuesday morning in March, when my body finally stopped asking permission and simply said, "No more." Before I tell you that morning, I want to tell you what I want you to understand by the end of this. Not advice. Not a list. One thing only: there is a difference between enduring your body and listening to it. I did not learn that difference until I was 71 years old, lying on a bedroom floor, one hand pressed flat against the cold hardwood, unable to remember my son's phone number. I spent 43 years building things. A business. A reputation. A family I was mostly absent from even when I was present. I worked 6 days a week from the age of 28 until the morning my body vetoed everything. I am not telling you I was a bad man. I am telling you I was a man who believed that pain was something you pushed through, and that belief nearly made me a man who died on a bedroom floor without saying goodbye to anyone. I have outlived 2 doctors who told me I was fine. That is not a joke. The first time I felt it, I was standing in the kitchen pouring a second cup of coffee. A Tuesday. Early November. The sky outside still dark, the house quiet, my wife Margaret still asleep upstairs. It started just below my left shoulder blade, not sharp, not dramatic, nothing like what they show in films where a man clutches his chest and staggers. It was dull. Heavy. Like someone had placed a warm stone inside my rib cage and left it there. It passed in 40 seconds. I finished my coffee. I drove to the office. I did not mention it to anyone. That was the beginning of 4 months I would spend negotiating with my own body like it was a difficult client, someone I could manage, delay, reschedule. I was 69 years old, still running a company of 31 people, still arriving before anyone else, still leaving after everyone had gone home. I had not seen a doctor for a routine visit in 11 years. 11 years. I remember that number clearly now because my doctor repeated it back to me later in a tone I had never heard from him before. Not anger. Something worse. Quiet disappointment, the kind a man reserves for something he cannot fix. But in November I did not think about doctors. I thought about the quarterly numbers. I thought about a contract we were close to losing. I thought about everything except the stone in my chest that came back 3 days later, then 5 days after that, then every other day, then every day. Margaret asked me once, only once, in December if I was sleeping well. I said yes. She looked at me the way she always looked at me when she knew I was lying but had decided not to fight it. 51 years of marriage, and she could read the specific shape of my silences. She knew something was wrong. I knew she knew. We sat at the dinner table and talked about our grandson's school play, and I passed her the bread and neither of us said the real thing. That is what I mean when I say it didn't look hard from the outside. From the outside it looked like an ordinary winter. From the inside I was waking at 3 in the morning with pressure across my chest like a hand pressing down, lying absolutely still, breathing slowly, waiting for it to pass. And it always passed. That was the problem. It always passed just enough that by morning I could convince myself it was nothing. Tension. Posture. Too much coffee. The cold air. I was a catalog of excuses, and I curated them carefully, choosing a different one each time so none of them wore out from overuse. In January I noticed I was walking slower to my car. Not dramatically. Just slower. I told myself the ice on the pavement was the reason. There was no ice on the pavement. In February I stopped taking the stairs at the office. 2 flights. I had taken those stairs every day for 19 years. I told my assistant the elevator was simply more convenient now. She nodded. I saw her watch me for a moment longer than necessary. I was not a stupid man. I want to be clear about that. I had built something real from very little. I had made difficult decisions under pressure my entire life. I understood cause and effect. I understood consequence. I understood everything except that my body was not a problem to be managed. It was not a difficult client. It was not something I could delay with the right words and a firm handshake. It was the only thing I actually owned. And I was treating it like something I could deal with later. Later. That word. I have turned it over in my hands for 24 years since that morning in March. Later is the most expensive word I know. It cost me more than any failed deal, any bad year, any mistake I ever made in business or in life. And the worst part, the part that still sits in me like that stone in my chest, is that I knew. Somewhere underneath all the excuses and the early mornings and the quarterly numbers, I knew. I had known since November. I just kept choosing not to know, every single day, with the kind of discipline and determination I wish I had applied to something worthwhile. There were 3 moments before the final morning, 3 times my body sent something louder than a dull ache, and 3 times I found a way to file it away under a category that required no action. The first was a Wednesday evening in late January. I was sitting at my desk after everyone had gone home. 7:40, the office empty, the cleaning crew not yet arrived. I was reviewing a contract, pen in hand, reading glasses low on my nose. And then without warning my left arm went strange. Not pain. Strangeness. A kind of distant heaviness, like the arm belonged to someone else, like the signal between my brain and my hand had passed through water. It lasted perhaps 90 seconds. I set the pen down. I sat very still. I looked at my hand on the desk, thick fingers, the old scar across the knuckle from a workshop accident in 1974, and I waited. It passed. I picked up the pen. I finished reviewing the contract. I drove home, ate dinner, watched the evening news, went to bed. I did not tell Margaret. I did not call anyone. What I did, and I remember this with a precision that shames me, was open my desk drawer the next morning and move a small bottle of aspirin to the front, where I could reach it quickly. That was my response. That was the full extent of my medical intervention. An aspirin bottle moved to the front of a drawer. I thought that was enough. I actually thought that was a reasonable and sufficient thing to do. The second moment came 3 weeks later, a Saturday afternoon in mid-February. Margaret and I were visiting our son David and his family. Our granddaughter Clara, 7 years old at the time, had asked me to chase her around the backyard. It was one of those pale winter afternoons where the light is thin and everything looks slightly washed out. Clara was laughing, running in her red coat, hair flying. I ran perhaps 30 feet. 30 feet. And I had to stop. I put my hands on my knees and I stood there breathing in a way I had never breathed before, not winded the way a man gets winded from exercise, but something different. Labored. Like each breath was a negotiation. Clara stopped running and turned around and looked at me with the pure undiluted concern that only a child's face can hold. "Grandpa, are you okay?" "Fine," I said. "Just old." She laughed because I said it like a joke. I had practiced saying things like a joke. David looked at me from the back porch, and I straightened up and waved my hand in the universal gesture of "it's nothing," and he accepted it because children want to believe their fathers are indestructible, even when the fathers are 69 and gray and stopping after 30 feet. That night in David's guest room I lay awake until 2 in the morning. Margaret was asleep beside me. I stared at the ceiling and I made a decision: I would call the doctor on Monday. I did not call the doctor on Monday. A contract situation arose. Then it was Wednesday. Then the week was over. The third moment was quieter than the other two, and somehow worse for its quietness. It was the last week of February. A Sunday. Margaret and I always had a slow Sunday morning coffee, the newspaper, no particular schedule. She was reading at the kitchen table. I was standing at the window looking out at the garden, which was still bare and gray from winter. And I had a thought, not a dramatic thought, not a frightening one, just a small, clear, almost administrative thought, the kind you might have about a household errand: I should get this looked at before something happens. Not if something happens. Before. I had moved, without noticing, from denial to quiet acknowledgement. Somewhere in those 4 months my body had worn me down to the truth. I knew. I was no longer pretending I didn't know. I was simply still choosing to wait out of habit now, not conviction. The momentum of all those previous mornings of doing nothing carrying me forward into one more morning of doing nothing. I stood at that window for perhaps 10 minutes. The garden was gray and still. Margaret turned a page behind me. "I'll call Hendricks this week," I said, without turning around. "Dr. Hendricks. Our family doctor for 22 years. "Good," Margaret said. "Just that. One word." She didn't look up from her book. She had been waiting 4 months for that sentence, and she received it with the careful stillness of a woman who knew that any reaction larger than one word might cause me to retreat. That was Sunday. I did not call on Monday. I did not call on Tuesday. On Wednesday morning I woke at 5:15 and swung my legs over the side of the bed and put my feet on the floor and pushed myself upright the way I had done every morning for 6 decades. And my body said no. It was not like falling. I want to be precise about this because the word collapse suggests something sudden and dramatic, and this was neither. It was more like a slow removal. Like something essential was being quietly withdrawn from me, the way light leaves a room, not all at once but gradually, and then you look up and realize you can no longer see clearly, and you don't know exactly when that happened. I stood for perhaps 3 seconds. Then my knees went and I went down sideways, one hand catching the edge of the nightstand, the lamp rattling, and then I was on the floor. The hardwood was cold. That is the detail I remember most clearly, not the pain, not the fear, but the specific cold of that floor against my cheek. The kind of cold that has no comfort in it whatsoever. The kind that simply reminds you that you are a warm thing in a world that is mostly indifferent. Margaret was beside me in seconds. I heard her voice before I fully understood where I was. "Robert. Robert, look at me." I looked at her. She was kneeling on the floor in her nightgown, her white hair loose around her face, and she was looking at me with an expression I had never seen in 51 years of marriage. Not panic. Something more controlled than panic and more terrible. The face of a person who has been quietly preparing for a moment and has now arrived at it and is determined not to fall apart. "I'm going to call an ambulance," she said. "Help me up," I said. "I just need a moment." "Robert." Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. It simply became the only solid thing in the room. "I am calling an ambulance." She stood up and walked to the telephone, and I lay on that cold floor and looked at the ceiling and listened to her voice in the hallway, steady and clear, giving our address, answering questions, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Helpless. Not the performance of helplessness that men sometimes use to avoid things. Actual helplessness. The real kind, where you understand in your body, not your mind, your body, that you are not in charge anymore. That all the decisions have been made and the only thing left is to lie still and wait for the consequences of every morning you chose later over now. The ambulance came in 11 minutes. I know because I counted. There was nothing else to do but count. I lay on that floor for 11 minutes looking at the water stain on the ceiling above the window, the one I had been meaning to have fixed for 3 years, and I thought about all the things I had been meaning to do. The list was long. It was so long it almost made me want to laugh, except I didn't have the breath for it. The paramedics were 2 young men, efficient and calm. One of them, dark-haired, couldn't have been more than 26, knelt beside me and put 2 fingers to my wrist and looked at his watch and then looked at me with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of someone whose job requires seeing people exactly as they are. "How long have you been having chest pains?" he asked. Just like that. No preamble. No softening. I looked at the ceiling for a moment. 4 months, I said. He didn't respond immediately. He continued what he was doing, calm and professional. But in the half-second before he moved on, I saw it, just a flicker, the briefest tightening around his eyes. Not judgment. Something closer to sorrow. The kind a young person feels when they encounter, for perhaps the 100th time, the specific way that grown adults destroy themselves through patience applied to entirely the wrong things. 4 months. I had said it out loud for the first time. And hearing it in my own voice, in that room, on that floor, with Margaret standing in the doorway with her arms crossed tight over her chest holding herself together, hearing those 2 words in my own voice was the most clarifying moment of my life. Not frightening. Clarifying. This is what 4 months of later looks like. This cold floor. This ceiling. These 2 young men moving around you with quiet urgency. Your wife's face in the doorway. The lamp still slightly crooked from when you grabbed the nightstand on your way down. They took me to the hospital. I had suffered what the cardiologist described as a significant cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but close enough that the word "close" appeared in his explanation 3 separate times. He was a small, precise man named Dr. Anand, and he sat across from me 2 days later and laid out what they had found in the kind of careful, measured language that doctors use when they are telling you something serious and do not want you to stop listening before they finish. 2 blocked arteries. Significant. Months, possibly longer, of compounding damage from unaddressed stress on the heart. Manageable now, with intervention. But the word he used, and it has stayed with me for 24 years, was preventable. Most of this, he said, tapping the folder on his knee, was preventable. He wasn't angry. He wasn't unkind. He said it the way a man states a fact about weather or mathematics. Something that simply is preventable. I was 69 years old. I had 31 people working for me. I had a wife who had known something was wrong since November and had waited, with extraordinary patience, for me to arrive at the truth on my own. I had a son who still believed I was indestructible. I had a granddaughter in a red coat who had looked at me with pure concern after 30 feet and accepted just old as an answer. and I was lying in a hospital bed being told that the thing that had almost killed me was preventable. Not inevitable. Not bad luck. Not the randomness of a body doing what bodies do. Preventable. I stared at the window across from my bed. The sky outside was flat and white. March sky. The kind that gives nothing away. Margaret was sitting in the chair beside me. She had been there for 2 days, going home only to shower and change, returning each time with the same composed, watchful presence. I looked at her, really looked at her, the way you look at someone when you have just understood how close you came to never looking at them again, and I said the only true thing I had said in 4 months. I'm sorry I waited. She reached over and put her hand over mine. She didn't say it's okay. She didn't say don't worry. Margaret had never been a woman who offered comfort that wasn't honest. She said, I know. And that was enough. That was exactly enough. I have had 24 years to think about what happened on that floor. 24 years of cardiology appointments, of medications lined up on the bathroom shelf each morning, of a body that works, that still works, at 95, imperfectly but persistently, because 2 young paramedics arrived in 11 minutes and a precise small doctor used the word preventable without flinching. 24 years is a long time to think about one word, and here is what I have concluded, not as philosophy, not as wisdom borrowed from someone else's life, but as the direct output of lying on a cold floor at 69 years old and understanding exactly how you arrived there. We do not ignore our health because we are stupid. We ignore it because we have confused endurance with strength. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Endurance and strength. They look identical from the outside. A man who pushes through pain looks exactly the same as a man who has no pain to push through. Nobody can tell the difference, not your colleagues, not your children, sometimes not even your wife, though Margaret came closer than anyone. From the outside, 4 months of chest pains that you dismiss and minimize and file away looks like a man in full command of himself. Productive. Reliable. Strong. It is not strength. It is endurance applied to the wrong problem. It is using the most admirable version of yourself, your discipline, your stubbornness, your refusal to be stopped, and pointing it directly at your own destruction. I had spent 40 years training myself not to quit. That training nearly killed me because I forgot to include one exception: your body is not an obstacle to overcome. It is the only instrument you have. A carpenter does not endure a broken saw. He stops. He fixes it. He does not grip the broken handle tighter and push harder and tell himself it is weakness to acknowledge that something is wrong with the tool. He stops because he understands that the work requires the instrument to function, and no amount of will compensates for a blade that no longer cuts. I had treated my heart like a problem of willpower. I had believed, somewhere below conscious thought, that wanting badly enough to be fine would make me fine. That the force of my intention would negotiate with my biology. That I was, in some essential way, exempt because I had always pushed through before, and it had always worked before, and the mind builds its expectations on what has always worked before. This is not strength. This is a story you tell yourself so that fear looks like courage. Here is the tool I want to give you. Not a philosophy. A single question. One question that I wish someone had handed me in November, when I was standing in my kitchen at 5 in the morning feeling a stone in my chest and reaching for the coffee instead of the telephone. The question is this: if this were happening to someone I love, my wife, my son, my granddaughter, would I tell them to wait? That is all. Nothing complicated. Nothing that requires wisdom or medical knowledge or courage you don't yet have. Just that question. Because I know with the certainty of a man who has had 24 years to examine every corner of his own reasoning that if Margaret had come to me in November and described exactly what I was feeling, I would have had her at Dr. Hendrick's office by afternoon. I would not have suggested stress, I would not have suggested posture or cold air or too much coffee. I would have looked at the woman I had loved for 51 years and I would have said, "We are going today." I extended to myself a standard of care I would never have extended to anyone I loved. Think about that. Not as an abstract observation. Think about it as a specific, personal, uncomfortable question directed at whatever you are currently enduring and calling strength. The back pain you've had for 8 months. The exhaustion that doesn't lift no matter how much you sleep. The thing you noticed 6 weeks ago and have successfully not thought about since. The appointment you keep meaning to make. Would you tell someone you love to wait? I know what you are telling yourself right now. I know because I told myself the same things with great fluency for 4 months. You are telling yourself you are busy. That it is probably nothing. That you will deal with it after this particular season of life settles down, after this project, after this quarter, after the children finish school, after things calm down. You are telling yourself that going to the doctor is an overreaction, that you are not the kind of person who panics over small things, that you have always been fine before and you will be fine again. You are telling yourself that taking care of yourself is something you will get to later. I understand that reasoning from the inside. I built it brick by brick over 4 months with the skill of a man who had spent a lifetime solving problems through sheer persistence. It is a very convincing structure. It feels like rationality. It feels like proportion. It feels, most of all, like the behavior of a person who is in control. You are not in control. You are postponing a conversation with reality, and reality is not known for its patience. I was 69 years old and I believed I had time. I believed the gap between now and later was something I could manage. I had managed gaps my whole life between what I had and what I needed, between where I was and where I wanted to be. I was good at gaps. I had built an entire life in the space between where things were and where I decided they would go. But a body is not a gap to be managed. It is a fact. And facts do not negotiate. Here is what 24 years of mornings after that floor have taught me: the body keeps a more honest ledger than the mind. Every time you override it, it records the transaction. It does not forgive the debt. It does not forget the entries. It simply waits, with the patience of something that has no ego invested in the outcome, until the account comes due. And when it comes due on a Wednesday morning in March, on a cold floor, with the lamp still rattling and your wife's face in the doorway and 2 young paramedics whose arrival you will count in minutes because there is nothing else left to do. You have time right now that I did not have on that floor. That is not a small thing, that is everything. I still live in the same house. Same bedroom. Same window with the flat March sky that gives nothing away. The water stain on the ceiling above the window, I never did have it fixed. I left it there deliberately. Margaret thought I was being stubborn, and I let her think that because it was easier than explaining the truth, which is that I needed it there. I needed something in that room that would catch my eye in the early morning and return me, without effort, to that floor. Margaret has been gone 6 years now. 58 years of marriage, and she left quietly, the way she did most things, with dignity and without drama, in her own bed, on a Tuesday morning in April. I held her hand. I was there. I was there because of that floor, because of 2 blocked arteries, because a precise small doctor used the word preventable, and I was fortunate enough to still be in the room to hear it. I got 24 more years with her. 24 years of slow Sunday mornings and coffee and the newspaper. 24 years of watching Clara grow from the little girl in the red coat into a woman with children of her own. 24 years of ordinary Tuesday evenings that I had almost traded for the comfort of not making a phone call. I think about the version of myself that stayed on that floor. The version where 11 minutes became 12, or 15, or too long. I think about him sometimes with a kind of grief, not for myself, but for Margaret sitting in that doorway, and for everything that would have been subtracted from the world without my knowing it was being subtracted. We do not know what we are the center of until we are gone from it. I am 95 years old. My chest is quieter now than it was at 69. The arteries cleared, the medications doing their patient daily work, the body maintained the way a body should be maintained when you finally understand it is not your adversary but your only transport through this life. I move slowly. I sleep lightly. I take 7 pills each morning lined up on the bathroom shelf, and I take them without resentment because each one represents a conversation with reality that I chose not to postpone. I look at that water stain most mornings. And I ask myself the only question that has ever mattered: if this were happening to someone I love, would I tell them to wait? The floor is still cold. Don't wait. The story is complete. Would you like me to compile the full story into one text?